folks, this is the Knock&Talk show, and I, of course, am your host, Patrick Faulkner. Today is Veterans Day, 11/11 of 2021, and this is episode number 11. Our guest is none other than retired Lieutenant Colonel Gene Cushman of the United States Air Force. Now, this was our first on-location recording, and of course, Murphy and his law was with us. Apparently, just before starting the interview, I tripped over the audio wire, which pulled it out of the back of the computer. So all that fancy equipment that you see in the video was deemed worthless. Thankfully, I did set up my iPad as a secondary video recorder, and took advantage of the dual redundancy that the Air Force taught me. Unfortunately, this does mean the audio sound quality is less than stellar, but at least the entire interview wasn't lost. I would like to thank our sponsor for this show, American Veteran Business Owners Alliance, or AVBOA. If you're a veteran-owned business, visit AVBOA, that's Alpha Victor Bravo Oscar Alpha.net, to learn more about becoming a certified VOSB and get some really awesome hard-charging digital badges for your business. Make sure you use the code KNOCK6, that's KNOCKSIX, when you order your digital badge. I'd also like to take this time to thank Resort Lifestyle Communities in Vestavia Hills, Alabama, a suburb of Birmingham, for allowing us to use one of their common area rooms for the on-location recording. Visit rlcommunities.com to learn more about their facilities and all the amazing amenities and accommodations that they offer for their residents. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the Knock&Talk show. This is episode 11, and we'll be back right after this. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Knock&Talk show. This is going to be episode number 11, and today we're on location in Birmingham, Alabama, with a very special guest. We're here with retired Lieutenant Colonel Gene Cushman of the United States Army Air Corps, and we're going to get to hear some amazing stories from an amazing man. Life before, during, and even after the military. I believe the Colonel's going to share some stories about the Berlin airlift more specifically, and that's great because before scheduling this, I didn't know a whole lot about the Berlin airlift. It wasn't covered much in school. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Lieutenant Colonel Gene Cushman, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you. My name is Gene Cushman. I was born in Chattanooga, Tennessee, Erlanger Hospital. At the age of 5 weeks, I decided I wanted to go to Washington. So I got on the train, and I took my parents with me and my older brother, and we went to Fort Lewis, Washington. My father was an Army officer, so I grew up as an Army brat.
Okay.
I don't remember much about Fort Lewis, and then we moved to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, where my father went to the field artillery school.
Okay.
From there, they sent us to that wild place in Alabama called Auburn. There was a school down there called Alabama Polytechnical Institute.
Okay.
And my father's duties there was to work with the ROTC.
Okay.
That's the Reserve Officer Training Corps. And while there, I started remembering things.
Okay.
We lived in a house between two fraternity houses, which was kind of interesting. The seniors in the fraternity houses wanted me to come over and paddle the pledges. Back in those days, they paddled pledges. Of course, the pledges were delighted because I couldn't hit them very hard. But anyhow, one thing that I've always remembered, a Christmas present I got when I was about 5 years old, it was a red wagon. That was the greatest Christmas present I ever got. I really enjoyed that wagon. One of the few dumb things I did, and I did a few.
Don't we all?
My father smoked cigarettes, and I kind of looked up to him, so I thought I'd better give that a go. Well, next door to us, one of the fraternity houses had a barn back behind the house. And my buddy and I crawled up in that barn and fired up some cigarettes. I took about 3 or 4 puffs and I didn't like it, and we were upstairs and I threw it out, I thought, on the grass. And he did the same thing, and we crawled down and went off playing somewhere. About 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes, we heard the fire trucks.
Oh no.
Let's go see where the fire is. Well, we went dashing up there, and we looked, and we saw what we had done. We could figure it out. I looked at him, and I said, I'm not going to tell anybody. And he said, I'm not going to tell anybody. They never could figure out how that fire started. Anyhow, from there, my dad was ordered to go. Oh, I went to the first grade in Auburn.
Okay.
Then we were ordered to Schofield Barracks, Hawaii, on the island of Oahu. And on the way, something happened that affected me the rest of my life. We stopped in Chattanooga where my mother's parents and my father's parents lived. And we were staying with my father's parents. And the biggest storm, worst storm I had ever seen came up, and I didn't like storms. And I remember I went over and kind of held on to my mother a little bit. And my dad saw that. And he went over to the closet, put on his raincoat and a hat, got me a raincoat, came over and put the raincoat on me and took my hand, and out we went in the storm.
Wow.
I mean, thunder, lightning, wind, rain. It was terrible. We walked around the block 4 times.
Wow.
Tornadoes don't bother me anymore.
I guess not.
It really taught me a lesson to enjoy weather. Well, anyhow, we went to Hawaii. I went to the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade over there, and I went with Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, Filipinos, Polynesians. And what's interesting, I could tell one from another. While we were there, one of the first airplanes to ever fly from San Francisco to Hawaii arrived. And the name of it was the Southern Cross. And it was flown by a fellow from Australia named Kingford Smith. And I think that's what started me thinking about flying. And it was real interesting. About 3 months later, the Army flew an airplane over there, and it was late. It flew by the islands, and the navigator finally figured what had happened, and he got back in. It was about 2 hours late to get back in. And they had a bunch of people, a bunch of the pilots flying the airplane, little ones entertaining the crowd. And this one lieutenant said he knew me because I went over there to the airfield a lot. We were only a half a mile from the school. And this fellow knew me, and he said, "You want to fly with me?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And it was a single seat. He put me in his lap.
No kidding.
Yeah. And I'm all ready to go, but my mother saw it. Well, this fellow was a lieutenant, and my father was a captain, I think.
Okay.
So Mama ranked the lieutenant. And she let him have it and got me out of that airplane.
Did she now?
The ironic thing about it, the fellow that was going to take me flying was named Twining, and he ended up as Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force.
Really?
Yeah, really nice fellow. Well, anyhow, one thing that happened going over was interesting in the boat. And leaving Hawaii, a bunch of my parents' friends came down, telling them goodbye and all that. Dad had been the adjutant of 11th Field Artillery. And one of the ladies gave my mother some candy in the States. She gave it to my brother and said, "Hold this." Well, my brother and I went around the other side of the boat and ate a bunch of candy. So the boat pulled out and it was lunchtime. So Mother and Dad took us down to lunch and they served greasy pork chops. And I took a couple of bites and I said, "I don't feel very good." Well, Mother took me up to the stateroom, and the staterooms weren't real big. There was, she had a bunk for herself, but the three of us were in a layer deal. And I had the middle, and Dad had the bottom, and my brother had the top. And of course, after lunch, Dad and my brother came up and got to take a nap, and I leaned over and threw up. Well, my Dad got up, put on his blouse. We didn't see him for 24 hours. He left. Anyhow, all the way to San Francisco, I was seasick. Once they dropped the anchor, I was okay. And I had a lesson. The boat had to have some work on it, so we got off the boat and stayed at the Presidio, that was the Army base in San Francisco. And Dad took us to a cafeteria. I'd never been in a cafeteria. Of course, they had the desserts in the wrong place, and I got 3 of them. And I got the regular meal, and so we sat down, had dinner, or lunch, whatever it was. I ate one dessert, and I was full. And I said, "When are we leaving?" Dad said, "When you finish the desserts." I had to finish those desserts. Really taught me a lesson about cafeterias. Well, we went from there down through the Panama Canal up to New York and down to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And I went to the 5th and 6th grade there. And I enjoyed Fort Bragg. I can remember, which nobody does anymore. At 5 o'clock every night, they'd fire a cannon, and they would play a song and lower the flag. And if we were out playing at the time, we would stop playing, and everybody knew where the flag was. And we'd all face the flag until the music quit, and then we knew the flag was down. So we'd go back to playing again. People don't do that anymore. I'm concerned about love of country. I don't think they're teaching it right in schools today. But then, a lot of things have changed since I grew up. Anyway, from there we went to Memphis, Tennessee, and I went to the 7th and 8th grade there. And then the parents sent my brother and myself to a school back in Chattanooga called Baylor. It was a military school. Very good school. I was fortunate enough to finish there. English gave me a fit for some reason. But anyhow, I was very fortunate. I met my best friend there. And we were buddies there for 4 years. From there, University of North Carolina together. We both pledged Phi Gamma. I remember one Sunday morning in 1941, I was a sophomore. I was going over to the library to study, and a fellow ran by me and said, "Cush, the Japanese just bombed Pearl Harbor." Well, I called the parents and I said, "I want them to listen." And there was a lot of discussion. And they talked me into finishing and then coming home and being sworn in there.
Okay.
Which I did. I finished that year and went back. Dad was stationed in Illinois at the time. And he swore me in, which is interesting.
That is great, yeah.
That was pretty interesting. I became an aviation cadet program in that program. And from there, I went to San Antonio, Texas, for a pre-flight test to teach them military procedures and all that. And of course, I was an Army brat to start off with, and I'd been to a military school for 4 years, so I knew how to goof off. So I really goofed off every opportunity I got. From there, we went to primary training in Fort Worth, Texas, at Hicks Field. We flew a little airplane called the PT-19. We got through that. We went to basic training in Enid, Oklahoma, and we flew the BT-13 there, basic training. And after we completed that, we went to a place called Victoria, Texas, for advanced training and preliminary gunnery. And when we completed that, we were second lieutenants.
Okay.
And they sent us off. I wanted to be a fighter pilot. And I ended up at a place in the tropics called Waycross, Georgia.
I know where Waycross is.
You do?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, anyhow, we flew, they gave us formation flying and all the other things, but the most important thing was the gunnery phase. Because if you're a fighter pilot and can't shoot, you're worthless.
That would make sense.
Pardon?
That would make sense.
Yes. It ended up, when we went through the gunnery phase, I beat all the instructors.
Okay.
And guess what happened? I didn't get to go shoot at anybody. I had to be an instructor. My instructor went to shoot at people.
Not exactly what you had in mind,
It
huh?
wasn't exactly what I had in mind. About every new class we got, I'd say, "Can I go with this class?" And the commander there had been the Air Force champion gunnery before the war. And I could beat him. And he said, I'm not going to let you go until I go, and I'm taking you with me." And he never went.
Oh, no.
Ended up, the war is over. From there, I went to Savannah, Georgia, Tyndall Field, Panama City, Florida, MacDill Field, Tampa, and Orlando. And from Orlando, I went to Tokyo. And we were there for a while, and they came in, they needed some people in the Philippines. And I thought I was going to a fighter outfit, and I ended up in a supply outfit. Golly, what a blow that was. And the Philippines was a pretty bad place to be at that time.
And why is that? Why was the Philippines a bad place to be?
I'll give you, for instance, we were walking down the street in Manila one day, and this fellow had a Parker pen and pencil set in his pocket, and this Filipino walked up and just took them out and put them in his pocket. And that was one of the minor things. And this fellow said, "What in the world are you doing?" And the fellow said, "Nothing." He said, "What's in your pocket?" He said, "You don't want to see what's in my pocket." He says, "I saw you put my pen in your pocket." "What's in your pocket?" So he reached and pulled out a pistol and stuck it right under this fellow's nose. He said, "You want to see anything else?" And of course my friend said, "No."
No.
But that was a routine over
Wow.
at that time. Anyhow, about 2 weeks after we were there, they called us together and they said, "Well, we've got to send 2 people back to Tokyo," which I would have liked to have done that. But I'm in the back of the room. The 2 guys up front got that job. They want 2 to go to Okinawa, 2 to Clark, 2 to Nichols. We want somebody to go to Guam. And he said, "We need 1 guy to go to Hawaii." I said, "That's me."
I'll do Hawaii.
I held up my hand. I said, "That was me." And it surprised me. Nobody opened their mouth.
Really?
So
Now, do you think that was because of Pearl Harbor? That maybe they were afraid that.
no, the war's over.
Okay.
War's over. So anyhow, of course, I want to go there because I lived there before. But anyhow, the next day, this major came up to me and he said, "Now you can stick around a few more days and do this." I said, "Major, I already got a flight to Hawaii. I'm leaving this afternoon." I jumped on the first airplane headed that way. So I ended up in Hawaii, and something very interesting happened there. I hadn't had any milk for a while. And there was a place up by Schofield Barracks that the lady across the street from us had no children and would take my brother and me to this place. It was called Chemo Farms, and give us a Kona frappe. And I think it was a milkshake with some of that Kona coffee in it.
Okay.
It was delicious. And I remembered that. So I got a Jeep. I was stationed down by Honolulu at Hickman Field. And I got a Jeep and drove up there. And I went in, and the bar is like the old drugstore. You know, a bunch of seats and a counter. And there was a young Japanese boy behind the counter, and he asked me what he could get me. And I said, "I'd like a Kona frappe." And he said, "I don't know how to make a Kona frappe." He's a young fellow. But what's interesting, there was an old Chinaman down behind the cash register. And he got up and he walked down there and he looked at me and he said, "Your name is Cushman, and your father was the adjutant of the 11th Field Artillery, and I'll make you a Kona frappe." That was 20 years before.
Wow.
He remembered it, which I thought was kind of interesting. Well, needless to say, I ended up getting 2, and I had those. But being in Hawaii, I was a fighter pilot, and they put me in a transport squadron, which at first I didn't like, but then I learned a lot about flying. I flew all over the Pacific Ocean. Little islands that one airplane every 3 months we'd come to, things like that. And you fly for 10 hours over all that water and look for a little bitty cone on the top of a mountain sticking out of the water. But it was really interesting. We flew Australia, Philippines, Tokyo, Midway Island. That's interesting.
Yeah.
They have a bird up there they call it a Goonie bird. They named an airplane after it. And you had to buzz the runway to get the Goonie birds off the runway before you could land.
Oh, wow.
But anyhow, Midway was interesting. While I was in Hawaii, we were supporting an engineer outfit down in the Solomon Islands. They were mapping the Solomon Islands. And my squadron had to support them, and we had to have an operations officer down there to handle the airplanes that came through. And I got the job for, I didn't get the job, they gave me the job.
They gave it to you.
And I didn't particularly want to go, but I had a choice. But anyhow, I went down there and I had quite an experience down there. When you're on an assignment like that, you can't sit in the barracks or in your Quonset hut, think about other things back somewhere else. Keep yourself busy or it'll get to you. That did happen to our doctor that was down there. But anyhow, we had an airplane, a little airplane that had a tank in the back, and I would fly 3 times a week and spray the camp area to keep the bugs down. And one day, all my buddies came flying in, and my clothes were starting to be rags because the washing machine we used down there just tore your clothes up. But anyhow, they came in, they all dressed neat, Class A uniform. And that night, they were going to leave the next morning. And they said, guess what, we're going, Cush. I said, hell, I know where you're going. You're going to Sydney. They said, that's right, you know what we're going to be doing? I said, yes, I know exactly what you're going to be doing. Oh, they gave me a bad time. So the next morning, they came down to get ready to go fly, and I had to spray the camp area that morning. And so I guess everybody at one time in their life, the devil made me do it.
The devil made you
The devil made me do this. I took off and I looked over, and here are all these guys in these nice clothes walking out to get in an airplane. I came in and I was about 5 feet off the ground, headed right for them. And one of them looked up and hollered, look out! And they all laid down. And as I went by, I went, I gave a little shot of diesel and DDT. And I pulled up and I looked back and they're all sitting there shaking their fists. And I said, lie back down. And I came back and made them lie down again to give. And I turned real quick and they're running for the hangar. Well, I didn't go back and land. I went and found the auxiliary field and landed. And I waited till I could hear them take off. Then I flew back over.
Now, did any of those guys try to come back, years later and play a similar prank on you?
No, unfortunately, no. Or fortunately,
no.
Fortunately, no. Because they would have killed me if they could have gotten me
They would have.
that time. I hope they had a good time in Sydney. Anyhow, I got back to Hawaii. I'd been gone 3 months, and I had a daughter that was 2 months old when I left. They shouldn't have sent me down there when they did. But I got home the last of April or the 1st of May, and then the last of June or the 1st of July, the Berlin crisis started. And a little background on that, in 1944, the British, Russians, French, and Americans got together and decided how to divide Germany up at the end of the war. And of course, the Americans, all they wanted to do was get the war over with. Well, what they didn't realize, Russia wasn't interested in the war ending. They wanted to take all of Europe. And they were well on their way to doing that. And so when they divided Germany up, they specifically got Berlin put 100 miles into their zone. And West Berlin went to the 3 allies, the French, the British, and the Americans. So West Berlin was our place, and the way they supplied to West Berlin was by Autobahn, railroads, and canals. And all of a sudden they blocked off the roads, shut down the railroad, and closed off the traffic in the canal. And that's when they started trying to serve West Berlin with just a few C-47s. It became obvious right away that wouldn't work. Well, skip back to Hawaii. I took my wife to dinner at the Officers Club, and after the movie was on, and my buddy was with us. And after we had dinner, there was an open air theater next door. So it was a good movie on, and when we got there, it was late, and it was hard to get a seat. And my wife and I had to sit way down front. My buddy could sit in the back because he could find a single seat.
Right.
Halfway through the movie, there was some commotion in the back, but the people down front couldn't hear any of it. So anyhow, when the movie was over, I was thinking about going over to the club and have a nightcap. We lived only a block and a half from the club, and then walk home. And when we came out of the theater, my buddy who had gone in civilian clothes was in Class A uniform. And I looked at him and I said, "What are you doing? Playing Boy Scout or something?" He said, "Cush, you're taking the first airplane out of here, and your crew is already down there waiting on you. They've got it all ready to go." And I said, "Where are we going?" He said, "We're going to Massachusetts." I said, "Listen, I read the paper. We're going to Germany." 45 minutes after I walked out of that movie, I was pulling off the ground headed for San Francisco.
Wow.
I didn't have time to do anything for my family. Well, we ended up going to Massachusetts. And they wanted me to go by Newland to the Newfoundland, to the Azores, to Germany, and the weather in Newfoundland was awful. I said, "I don't want to go. I'll go to Bermuda and go to the Azores." And they said, "You can't do that. The VIPs, they don't want to go to Bermuda." And I said, "Hell, I'll just fly straight to the Azores." And he said, "You don't have enough fuel." I said, "I got enough fuel. I got 900 extra gallons in my airplane." So we went to the Azores, and then we took off. They asked us to stop in Paris. They were having some problems. Incidentally, the air communications between West Germany and West Berlin was 3 airplanes a day. Well, when we got the thing really going, we were running one every 3 minutes.
Right, okay.
And it was quite a production, but we got GCAs put in, that's ground control approach. And we use ground control approach on every approach. It could be sunshiny and not a cloud in the sky. We use ground control approach. And that really paid off in the wintertime because it would get dark about 3 o'clock. It wouldn't get light the next day till about 9 something. So we did a lot of night flying, and the weather in Germany in the winter is awful.
It is awful.
Oh God, I've never flown this stuff. I think I went over there as an airplane driver and I came home a pilot. Boy, let me tell you something, we flew in the weather like, as a matter of fact, one day I had a day off, and this squadron commander called me. He said, "Get your crew, you're taking an airplane to Berlin." I said, "Major, this is my day off." He said, and I said, "What's wrong with the crew supposed to be flying?" "Well, the weather's so bad, and he lives in town and he can't drive out here." but I'm supposed to fly. Oh God, I said, okay, so I'll never shall forget, we went down and I was being a butt. He wanted me to get in the airplane and take off. I said, can I walk around it, see if it got all the wings and engines on it? And it had ice all over it. I said, Major, this airplane won't fly with all that ice on it. Well, he ran and got one of these spray deals and sprayed the ice off of it. When I got out on the runway, I looked at the co-pilot and the engineer. I said, I can see 200 feet down the runway. There's a white line. I said, I hope there's nothing on the runway, because here we go.
Oh, no.
We broke out at 1,500 feet, and there were the Alps. It was beautiful. Anyhow, we didn't get back for 4 days on that deal. That was something else. I'll tell you a couple. There were a lot of funny stories. I could talk for an hour on the funny stories.
We've got all the time you want to spend, so share them.
There was when we first got over there. The first flight I had is the first part of July. I'm at 6,000 feet, and I had about 4 inches of rime ice on all my wings, leading edge, and the windshield was solid ice. And it's the 1st of July, and of course we're from Hawaii, and we didn't have de-icing boots or any of that stuff to get rid of it. I never shall forget, I got up to Berlin, called for landing instructions. They said, you can hold on a certain beacon. I said, any other airplanes holding? He said, yes, there are 10 others holding on that beacon. Well, I didn't want to go to that beacon. 10 other guys up there milling around that one beacon. And fortunately, we ran into what I call a sucker hole. I could see out of the side, couldn't see out of the front. I saw this big hole, and I could see buildings, and nothing but walls, no roofs. Berlin really got bombed pretty bad toward the end of the war. So I just circled down in there, and the ice melted off my airplane. It was real smoggy in there. I couldn't find Tempelhof. That was the field. I looked all over for him. Finally, another airplane went by with a big red tail on it. One of the Alaskan boys. There were 4 different squadrons doing the airlift. One from Alaska, one from Hawaii, one from Panama, and one from Austin, Texas.
Okay.
And the Alaskan boys had a color all their own, because their tail was painted red in case they ever crashed.
Okay.
It'd be easy to find in the snow. Anyhow, we had to go over a 7-story building on the approach. My rate of descent was something I'd never done before. But anyhow, we landed and offloaded, and on takeoff, I'll never forget it, halfway down the runway, fog. I mean, solid fog. Anyhow, we climbed up over, and I think we went over the Russian zone, and it was cold again, and I turned on the nose heater that's run by gas. And as I made the turn to get off the Russian zone, big explosion. And I thought, damn it, that heater blew up. Well, the other 2 thought the Russians were shooting at us. The compass was just spinning like this. There was static electricity and an explosion out there. I'll tell you about that when we land. But we had a gyro compass, so we flew on back. And when we landed, I got out, and there was a big dent in the front, and the hole burnt through the left side over by where the pilot is, and all of the stringers that run long were all caved in. All of the fabric was off of the top aileron and the top elevator. And I walked into this major and took my wings off and said, I quit. And he said, you're taking the next airplane up there now. Put the wings back on. Oh, golly. Well, that was probably the worst flight I had. Golly. Anyhow, everything went along and it got better and better, and then they got the GCA, and weather wasn't a big factor on landing because they bring you right down. As a matter of fact, one night I was landing about 4 o'clock up at Tempelhof in Berlin. My co-pilot had gone, something had happened to him. He knew he was going to die the next second. He wouldn't do anything. And he was new. He'd never seen what we were flying in. And I landed that night and never saw the runway until I put the nose wheel down. I landed completely, never saw the runway, put the nose wheel down. That's how good the GCA was. They could send us on the runway. But anyhow, I flew that. The engineer didn't want that fellow to fly back with us. He said he's not going to fly back. I said, you're not the commander, I am. And I will take him back, but he's not going to fly anymore. I grounded him.
Oh, wow.
Well, they said, we need pilots. Well, you can't ground him. I said, you need dead pilots? Torn up airplanes? Keep them on. I'm telling you, I was an instructor pilot.
Okay.
And I had to do that. And you know, he's a nice kid. But put him under pressure, and you have a problem. Anyhow, a couple of the things that happened, let's see. I was ready to go. We were running one every 3 minutes, and the timer said, you got a passenger coming. And I said, I got to roll in a minute and a half. And they said, well, I'll look out, and here's a big staff car. So I told the engineer, go back and get that guy in the airplane. And he and the guy buckle in back there, and we'll take off and then come on up. Because we used it usually for takeoff and landing. But anyhow, about halfway up to Berlin, I had to turn around and look for something. I saw who our passenger was. It was an admiral. And he's a big guy. And I said, how are you, Admiral? I'm all right. Golly, this guy's going to be great. And he's trying to look out the windows, you know, where the pilots look out. And I did one of the dumbest things I've ever done in my life. I said, would you like to get up in my seat for a few minutes? Look out this window. I believe I would. Make the long story short, he would not get out of the seat. I didn't know who in the world he was. Well, I watched him, and he was flying fairly good. So, anyhow, he wouldn't get out of the seat.
Wow.
And he's an admiral, and I'm a lieutenant. So I told the engineer, get out of the seat. Engineer handles the gear, the flaps, and all that business.
Okay.
And anyhow, we get in on the final approach. I put the gear down for him. I put in the hand flaps for him. We go a little further, and he said, give me full flaps. I wouldn't give him full flaps. 3 times he said, give me full flaps. I wouldn't give him full flaps. And I'm looking over the nose, you know, and I'm checking everything. And finally I said, okay, full flaps coming down. And we made a typical Navy landing, which is a controlled crash.
Right.
God, we hit like a ton of bricks. Anyhow, I was the first one out of the airplane. I got a cup of coffee, and this admiral walks up to me and he said, Lieutenant, I'm going to call a board on you. I turned to him and I said, really? What for? I gave you orders to give me full flaps 3 times and you wouldn't do it. I said, let me tell you something, Admiral. I don't know who you are. I don't know anything about you. I don't even know if you're qualified to fly my airplane. He says, I'll have you know I fly the R5D. I said, do you really? He said, yes. I said, how's airspeed calibrated? He said, knots, of course. I pointed my airplane and I said, miles per hour. He got white as a sheet. I wished I'd never told him that. I wished he'd have called the border. It would really embarrass him. You know, there's a difference between miles per hour and knots. If I put out full flaps, we'd have landed in the cemetery. You come over a cemetery coming in. Anyhow, he said, thank you, Lieutenant, and turned around and walked off. That was one of them that was kind of a kick, but there were many more. One, a lot of people will disagree with me, but I'll tell the story. I was an instructor pilot, and I was always checking somebody out. I never had a true co-pilot. And I'm checking out this captain. He's sharp as a tack, really good. His name was John, I remember that. And we walked in, and this major came up, his new squadron commander. I had never met him. And he said, you're going to Berlin tonight? I said, yes, sir. The ceiling was 100 feet, and the freezing was on the ground. It was cold as hell, and the ceiling was right down on top of it. He said, the colonel wants an airplane taken to Oberpfaffenhof, and that was where they did certain type maintenance. And he wants it to go tonight. And I said, okay, I'll check that out. So I walked into the weather station, and I sent my engineer out to check the airplane that we were going to take up there. And the weather was 100 feet there, and freezing was on the ground, and they had hills around 300 feet all around this thing, this base up there. And the only way to make an approach the runway was a straight line, and the beacon was over here somewhere. There was no way to line up to land. So I went back in. The engineer came up and said, about 6 of the engine instruments aren't working, and you only have 1 set of gyros. Normally there were 3 sets of gyros, and that's what you fly on in bad weather. That's not very good.
No, I wouldn't think so.
If you lose that other one, you're in deep trouble. So I said, Major, the weather's pretty bad. I checked it. It's supposed to get a little better in the morning. I'll come back in the morning and say. He said, I don't think you understand what I said. I said, what'd you say? He said, the colonel wants it up there tonight. I said, well, would you come in and check the weather? So we went in, I went in, we checked the weather again. We went back into the operations office. I expected them to say, come on in the morning. And he said, get on out in the airplane. The colonel wants it up there tonight. I looked at this major, and then I turned to the boy that would be flying co-pilot. I said, John, yeah, Cush, you got the night off. I'll see you. John was quick. He's out the door on his motorcycle,
gone
about as fast as I'm telling you. He's gone, and this major turned beet red, mad. What in the hell do you think you're doing? Well, you said the colonel wanted that airplane to get up there tonight. He said, who's going to fly it? I said, you and me. And I want to tell you something, Major, I'm a hell of a lot better pilot than you are, but I'll fly co-pilot and you fly pilot. Now let's go get in the airplane. Guess what he said?
We're going to go in the morning?
Yeah, why don't you come back and go in the morning? Golly. Anyhow, there were a whole bunch of deals like that. I could talk for an hour. Well, finally, I flew one night in January, and when I landed, they had some champagne. They said, "Cush, that's your last flight. You can go home now." So, I won't tell you the fiasco I went through getting on an airplane to go back to the States. But anyhow, I get back to the States, and my brother was stationed in Bangor, Maine, and we landed in Massachusetts. So I immediately got an airline ticket to Bangor, Maine. And this sergeant came up and he said, "Lieutenant, you're supposed to be in Fort Dix tomorrow morning." I said, "I'm not going to be able to make that." He said, "Why?" I said, "I'm going to Bangor to see my brother. The orders say you're supposed to be there tomorrow morning." I said, "I don't think you heard me. I'm going to Bangor, Maine. I'll get over there eventually to Fort Dix." Well, I went up to see my brother. I landed at a great time. They were having a lobster party. Man, these girls were feeding me lobster. It was great. Anyhow, I arrived at Fort Dix a couple of days later, and I had to report to this major, and he was mad.
I imagine.
He was mad because he said, "I'm sending you to Smoky Hill, Kansas to fly old B-29s. I said, "Major, I don't want to go to Smoky Hill, Kansas. I didn't even know where that was."
I don't know where that is now.
So I don't want to go there. He said, "That's fine, because that's where you're going." Well, I said, "Cush, you got to do something, baby." So I went outside and I got me a handful of quarters. And I got to a telephone. And I had two buddies in Hawaii. One of them was in personnel. And I knew he'd been transferred to the Pentagon. And there was another boy there. He was a West Pointer, a real good friend of mine. And he'd been transferred to the Pentagon. So I called and got one of them, and then he got the other one. We all three on the phone. And they want to know all about the Berlin airlift. They knew I'd flown it. And so we must have talked 30 minutes about the Berlin airlift. And finally, the personnel guy said, "Cush, what do you call us for?" I said, "Let me tell you something about this major up there." So I told him what the major was doing to me. I said, "I don't want to do that." He said, "What do you want to do, Cush?" I said, "I want to go to Oklahoma City, Tinker Field, and get in flight tests. And that's what I'd really like to do." And this old boy said, "Call me back this afternoon. I'll tell you how it goes." I said, "Great." So I called him back the next day. At 4 o'clock. And he said, "Your orders will be there in the morning. You're going to Oklahoma City."
Nice.
I said, "It's good to know personnel people."
Yes, it is.
So anyhow, I walked in the major's office. He was mad. He said, "I don't know what happened, but something happened on your orders, and you have to go to Oklahoma City." I said, "Really? How did I luck out on that one?" But anyhow,
how did this happen?
It's pure luck.
It's just pure luck.
So anyhow, I go to Oklahoma City and I report in on a Thursday to this colonel who was chief of maintenance. And he said, "Cushman, what do you want to do?" I said, "Sir, I would like to get in flight test." And I explained to him I was qualified in single, twin, and 4-engine airplanes and all that. And he said, "Well, that sounds good. Why don't you take Friday off and report Monday and we'll get it done." I was just reporting in. So, anyhow, I report in Sunday morning, and there's a major sitting out there by the colonel's office. And he said, "Your name Cushman?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "There's your desk right over there." I said, "Is that part of flight test?" And he said, "No, that's production control." I knew about that much about production control. I said, "You know, Major, I'm a pilot. I don't know. I don't think I understand all that production control." He said, "Well, that's what you're going to do." There was a major, he was the major running production control, and a captain, assistant, and I was the assistant to the captain. I was the lieutenant. Well, the first job they gave me, they said, "We have misplaced $5 million." Back in 1949, they missed a lot in those days. That's so many. "We want you to find it." Where in the world do I go to? I didn't know anything. So anyhow, I went to work. Took me almost 10 days, 2 weeks. And I finally wrote my report, and they were just thrilled to death because I had found $4.5 million. I said I couldn't find that. They were tickled to death. They thought I'd done an outstanding job. Well, anyhow, to make the story shorter, the major leaves and the captain takes over. And now I'm the assistant. So I'm the assistant. I'm learning a little bit about production control. 6 months later, the captain leaves. I had made captain. I am chief of production control.
Wow.
I mean, I went 1 year, and I go from nothing to the chief. Let me tell you what the chief's job was. Any project that came in that had to be done came to me. I had to read it, understand it. I was smart enough that I had 4 civilians. I had 700 civilians working for me. 4 of them in my office, and they had 100 years of maintenance experience. Don't think I didn't use them.
Yeah, smart man.
I didn't start telling everybody what to do. I'd say, "What do you think?" Well, it worked out real well. They liked it.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we got a project in, I would study it, of course, and let them study it. And then we'd all sit down and talk about it. And I'd get each one of them to tell me how he thought it ought to run. And I'm putting it all up here while they're talking. And then I'd say, "Well, do you think we can do so-and-so?" I would put together what they had said. And almost to a man, they would agree. And it worked like a charm. And anyhow, then we went to work. Well, we controlled 16,000 men in the maintenance division because we wrote all the work orders.
Wow.
We had to tell each one what had to do. We had to schedule the airplane in, schedule the parts, schedule the crews. It was a big job.
Yeah.
And there were 16,000 that we had to do this for. And we had 8,000 in the supply division, and we were their biggest customers. So we had another 8,000 that we had to deal with. That's 24,000 people on that basis. And my little job controlled all of that. Well, that was interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, Lord have mercy. That was something else. Anyhow.
So how long were you there doing maintenance and production before getting back into flying?
Well, about a year and a half later, General LeMay decided he wanted me to fly the B-47. That's a new jet bomber. When I say me, he picked, you had to be a captain or better, you had to be a regular officer, you had to have over 4,000 flying hours, And I hit all those qualities. I didn't want to leave. I was getting where I liked production control. Plus, I had a private airplane there. I'll tell you a story on that. We got a project in Brookley Field is down in Mobile and had a project very similar. And I don't believe in reinventing the wheel. So I went into the colonel. I said, Colonel, we got this project. I briefed him on it. And, they had that something almost identical down in Brookley. And I think it would be smart if I flew down there and talked to the chief of production control. I had a P-51 that I could be down there in about an hour and 30 minutes. I also had a B-26 that would do it quicker. I had all these airplanes I could fly. But anyhow, I'm talking to the colonel, and he said, well, when do you plan to go down? It was Friday. I said, well, I'm pretty busy this morning. I thought I'd go down there sometime this afternoon. He said, well, that might be a good idea. By the way, Cushman, is Auburn playing Alabama this weekend? I said, Colonel, you so smart. Yes, sir, they are playing. Well, anyhow, I flew down there and I talked to him and I popped up to Birmingham. I stayed in a football game, parties a couple of days, and I tucked the wheels at 7 o'clock Monday morning, and I was in my office in Oklahoma City at 9. Oh God, I really enjoyed that. I could take one of those airplanes and zap over the weekends. But anyhow, General May called, and I was sent to Ellington Field to teach me to be a navigator on a pilot. And then they sent me to Mather Field to be a bombardier. The pilot on the B-47 had to be a pilot, a navigator, a bombardier, and a radar. Had to be qualified in all of those. So anyhow, the airplanes weren't quite ready for us, and they sent me to a place called Roswell, New Mexico, where they were flying B-29s. And I never shall forget, what kind of outfit am I getting in? I reported in to my squadron commander, and he said, are you one of those four-headed monsters? And I said, if you're talking about, and I knew you used the right nomenclature, I said, yes, sir. We're going to make you a navigator. I said, sir, I'm a pilot. Well, you got all these qualifications. Golly. I thought, what is happening to me? So, anyhow, I remember they put me on a crew, and I had a second lieutenant as the pilot. He had about 900 hours, mostly co-pilot time. And here I had 4,000 all pilot time. Well, it was pretty obvious this kid had a problem. But anyhow, we flew around for a while, and they had a red-headed chief pilot there, and he was rough. He cut his engines on that B-29 on the left side, and he's trying to roll into trim, and he wouldn't let him roll in trim. And the kid's leg was shaking, holding the rudder. I said, you got a co-pilot. I'm sitting there between them. I said, why don't you tell the co-pilot to get there? He's just sitting on his butt doing nothing. So he said, sir, would you get off the rudder? And this major turned around and he said, why did you think of that yourself? Well, anyhow, we flew around a while, and finally they said, Well, we got a little more time. We'll let you shoot a couple of landings. So I came in and shot a landing and went around and shooting another. And the B-29, the front of the airplane's about that far in front of you.
Okay.
And it's all glass. So you're sitting back there. Well, over the runway's here, and I went a little faster and I was S-ing back. And I started S-ing back, and he started talking to me, and he was on the controls, and he's talking, just give me a fit. And I'm like this with my feet on the floor. He said, now you're doing it, now you're doing it. I said, Major, you really like the way I'm flying, right? He looked at me and he said, what the hell are you doing? I know. I said, what the hell are you doing? Do you want to fly or do you want me to fly? He looked at me and he said, I want you to fly. I said, well, get your hands off the controls. We landed.
Okay.
We got out of the airplane to start. The chief sergeant was on that airplane. And about 10 of us got off that airplane. And they all crowd around this major and they're walking in. I'm walking by myself. I said, I think they really screwed up. And this sergeant comes back. He said, Captain, I've never seen anything like that in my life. He said, you're the next aircraft commander in this wing. I said, well, I don't know about that. He said, I've never seen anybody like you. You're different. Anyhow, I flew the B-29 a little bit, and I flew the B-50. The B-50s were the ones that dropped, not the B-50, but that wing was B-29 that dropped the bomb.
Okay.
Then I went to a place called Lake Charles, Louisiana, and started flying B-47. And I flew B-47s there for about 3 years, I guess. And there were two missions we had to do. One was we had to fly 21 hours.
21 hours straight?
Mm-hmm. And I think 10 of them had tried it, none of them completed it. And they called me and they said, you got the 21-hour mission day after tomorrow. We got you scheduled for 5 o'clock in the morning takeoff. All of them had been using the 5 o'clock in the morning takeoff. You had to refuel 3 times. And you had to refuel out over the Gulf of Mexico where you couldn't see anything. And if you take off at 5 o'clock in the morning, you got to catch it as your last refueling when you're tired. So I said, well, okay, we'll fly it, but we're not taking off at 5 o'clock in the morning. They said, when do you want to take off? I said, 9 o'clock at night. I want to take off, and when I want to hit the first refueling out over the Gulf of Mexico when I'm still fresh. And that was about 4 hours after takeoff. And maybe 5. And that worked out very nicely. And we're the first ones to complete it. And the Colonel thought that was great. But anyhow, then the next thing we had a thing called an evaluation. 11 of them had gone down to evaluation, and every one of them had failed it. And I landed one afternoon about 5 o'clock, and they said, we got you scheduled to go to McDill Sunday afternoon, and you can start the evaluation Monday morning. I said, what is it? And they said, it's down at McDill, and you have to fly down there. So I said, okay. So we go down there, and they do a ground school. You have to, all about the airplane, all about atomic bombs, and the whole thing. We passed that. So then we had the flying deal. And if you're scheduled to take off at 10:15, you don't take off at 10:14 or 10:16. You want to roll at 10:15. Well, my co-pilot had to go out first with the sergeant, I remember, and they were supposed to check the rear gun. There were two 20 millimeters in the tail of that airplane. And that was the co-pilot's responsibility.
Okay.
So to make the takeoff time, they went out early, and we got to do the get for that takeoff time. Well, we get up. I had my evaluator had more B-47 time than anybody in the Air Force, and he was pretty rough. So anyhow, the co-pilot had gone out 15 minutes ahead, and then we go walking out there, and here the co-pilot is leaning up against the bomb bay door, and the sergeant is sitting on the ground leaning up against the outrigger wheel. And I said, "Y'all all finished?" And my co-pilot said, "We haven't even started." I said, "What's the problem?" And this sergeant piped up, "Well, you didn't have what you're supposed to have." And I said, turned around to him and I said, "What are we supposed to have?" "Well, you're supposed to," I said, "Don't talk anymore. Get on your feet." He looked at me. I said, I used a few words I'm not going to use here.
Okay.
"Get on your feet." He got up and I got in his face. I said, "Let me tell you something. When you talk to me, you say 'sir' first, and then you tell me what you're going to tell me. You understand that, Sergeant?" He'd never had that done. He'd been buffaloing all the officers because he was an evaluator. Mm-hmm. Well, it made me mad. And I really got on him. And I said, "What do you have to have?" He said, "Sir, we have to have a piece of paper that says the guns have been qualified." I said, "Is that all you need?" He said, "Yes, sir." I had him right where the hair was short. Mm-hmm. Anyhow, I turned around to the engineer, my engineer, or crew chief, I guess.
Okay.
I said, "Johnson?" He said, "Yes, sir." I said, "I'm going to ask you a question, and the answer is yes. You understand that?" He said, "Yes, sir." "Have those guns been harmonized?" "Yes, sir." "All right, put it on that piece of paper that it's been on the Form 70 that the guns have been harmonized." I stuck it in that sergeant's face. "There's your paper. Now get back there, and I'm going to give you 5 minutes to do what you should have done in 10 minutes. They went back there. We did the deal. We get the airplane to do all we're supposed to do. We get out on the runway to make the takeoff time, and I took the power up, and there's 6 engines, and number 5 is sick. Oh, no. It's not putting out the power. Well, it was a pilot's mission, and it wasn't loaded with a lot of fuel, so it was lighter than normal. And I looked around, and the evaluator couldn't see the instruments. I thought, okay. So I took those 5 engines up, and we made the takeoff on 5 instead of 6. And we got up, we were flying. I called him on the mic, and I said, "We're having trouble with number 5 engine. I think I'll shut it down." We passed the course.
Oh, good. Okay.
We passed the course, and we were the first ones through the 21 hour. We were the first ones to do this thing. And the next thing I know, they said, "We need somebody in quality control. We got a problem down there." So they take me, give me that job. Oh, Lord have mercy. I had 17 sergeants that they weren't true sergeants in my book. and they were kind of doing things halfway.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we had a little session. Some lieutenant colonel walked in the office and said something to one of them, and he had his feet up on his desk. And he leaned back and answered it, and of course the colonel jumped all over me. And we had one sergeant who was running the thing in the office. I said, tell all the men I want them so-and-so at 12 o'clock in a certain building. Well, you can't do that. That's their lunch hour. That's the way they operate. I said, I don't think you quite understood me, Sergeant. When I tell you to do something, do it. And if you don't, we'll have some stripes falling off of your arm. You got it, Sergeant? Then he says, yes, sir. I said, well, you should have seen what I did to that group. Lord have mercy. There wasn't a military one in the bunch, but when I got through, there was a bunch in the military. They changed a lot. That whole place changed. They had us in a building, and they were all in there, and what they had for desks were picnic tables, and that was their office.
Wow.
And there were 5 different colors in the deal, and all the tech orders were falling apart. I walked in and looked at that, and I said, they're working in here. They had no lockers for their equipment. 1 week later, they had all the lockers, they had all desks, and I went down to where the fellow that, I'm forgetting the name of the outfit, that did the painting, talking to this major. I said, we need somebody to come in and put one color in that room. Well, I don't know if we can do that, and if we can, it might take about 6 months. I said, I don't think you understand. We're working now, not 6 months from now. We need it now. He said, well, I'm not sure we can do that. And his office, I'd been in it before, and it was just plain old wall. It was all wood panel. Beautiful office. I said, Major, this office certainly looks nice. As a matter of fact, I think it's even better than the colonel's. I think I'll ask the colonel to come down and look at your office. I started out the door. He said, wait a minute. He said, they'll be there tomorrow to paint your deal. Well, there had been a sergeant there that was one of the best sergeants I ever knew. And when they gave me this job, he said, you don't want to go down there, Captain. He liked me for some reason. We got along great. And I said, well, like I have a choice. But anyhow, he said, that's the worst place in the whole, that's the reason they're sending you down there, I guess. But anyhow, I was there for a while, and he came down to me about a month later, and he said, you have room for me down there. It had changed 100%. The way they operated, the way I backed them when they were right, and how I kicked them in the rear end when they were wrong. They got the picture and they really started going. But anyhow, it was a learning lesson for everybody. And then all of a sudden, I get orders back to being evaluated. They were impressed evidently the way I talked to the sergeant and the fact that my crew passed everything. And about the same time, my colonel, who didn't like me at first because my wife had done something she shouldn't have done. Anyhow, he didn't like me at first. So he called me in his office and he said, I'm ordered to Thule And I'm not asking anybody in the wing to go with me except you. And that would help with promotions and all that business. But my wife was pregnant, and I had orders to Tampa, Florida. And I thought about it for about 2 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, Colonel, could I get, he was going to come back and be DO of the 15th Air Force. That's a big job. And I'd be his boy Friday. He said, I'm coming back and the 15th Air Force and be the DO, the Director of Operations. And I said, can I take a rain check on that? And I would love to join you, but my wife's pregnant, due any minute, and all this sort of thing, trying to give him all this. He finally said, I understand, and he said, yes, I'll call you. I think one reason he did that, there were 2 reasons. One, the job I did, the jobs that I had done all the way through. And he used to like to fly with me for some reason. And I'd take the airplane away from him. He couldn't fly very well. I'll take it, flat take it out. I said, I got the airplane car. And anyhow, there was one mission that we flew there that we're going to end up in England. And all the maintenance officers were going to England except me. And they came up and they said, now, you got the job of launching 35 airplanes. And the secret is that all had to roll on the minute. They're scheduled. I called in 3 sergeants and I sat them down. They're the line chief of the 3 squadrons.
Okay.
And I briefed them on the whole mission. And I sat there and looked at them after I did that. Finally, one of them looked at me and he said, are you telling us that you want us to do that? I said, you're damn right. You don't expect me to do it, do you? Look, they grinning. They had never been given that job.
Wow.
In SAC, for some reason, they thought colonels were the only people who make decisions. Good sergeants are better than anybody. They know their job. Anyhow, on that deal, everything worked fine, except we had a problem with the first airplane. Very important to me. The colonel's in the first airplane. It's 10 minutes before he would start engine. And the colonel gets out and goes over to the number 2 airplane. The pilot gets out, and I knew him. And I said, Bill, what the hell are you doing? He said, we got a fuel leak. We're not taking this airplane. I said, where's the fuel? 10 minutes before engine start, you find a fuel leak. Where is it? Well, they refueled the refueling nozzles in front of the pilot, up the front where they put the balloon in. And you have to pressurize that line, and a little piece of dirt under a gasket. So he pointed a little bitty stream of diesel fuel, not diesel, JP4. And I said, that's not a fuel leak. That's a little leak around the gasket. Well, it looks like a fuel leak to me. I'm not taking it. I told the co-pilot, I said, get back up in the airplane. I'm taking this airplane. Is the parachute still in the airplane? He said, yes. I said, I'll take the airplane. Co-pilot got back up and I started up. He said, wait a minute. I'll fly it. I said, all right. Well, it went over and they got the colonel out of the number 2 airplane to bring him back. He came over and he said, what the hell happened? He said, Cushman talked him into it. Take the airplane. He walked over to me. He always kept a cigar, never lit it. General LeMay did the same thing. I think that's the reason he did it. He said, what's going on here? I said, let me tell you something, Colonel. You see that line of 35 airplanes that like a bunch of these little sheep? If something happens to the leader, look out. We got problems. This airplane has got to go on time. Up in the airplane, the way they go. He called me in, he said, we were congratulated on one of the best launches SAC has ever had.
Wow.
I said, well, do you mind if I call somebody up here? And he said, no. When? I said, right now. I got on the phone, I got those 3 sergeants. I said, come on up. And I said, before they got there, I said, Colonel, I want you to congratulate these 3 fellows. They came in and he made a big fuss over them, which he should have done.
Yeah.
They did a great job. But anyhow, I did go with him, and I ended up down there in Tampa, and I was an evaluator. And then they moved us to Barksdale in Shreveport, Louisiana.
Okay.
And the evaluation team, they wanted to set up an instant program for SAC pilots. And there were 5 of us that did it. And one of them was named Bill Payne. He and I flew together a lot. He's the best pilot I ever flew with. I learned a lot from him. He learned little from me. I learned a lot from him. I'll tell you one story on him. He and I both were ordered to B-58s. And that was at Carshall in Fort Worth, Texas. And that's a supersonic bomber.
Okay.
And I had been ordered also to Spain. So I made a decision to go to Spain. And I had 2 young children. I thought it'd be good for them, being a foreign country, foreign language, all that. And Bill went to the B-58 program. And he left before I did. I was still at Barksdale when he left. One day I was walking through the operations deal, and the chief pilot for the B-58 was a friend of mine. And he had this colonel with him. And the colonel's name was Blizzard. And we'll call him Armstrong, was the chief pilot. And he said, hey, Cush, come over here. I want you to meet somebody. So I went over and met Colonel Blizzard. We chatted around for a while. And I noticed they had come in a Delta Wing fighter. And the B-58 is a Delta Wing airplane. So I said, well, by the way, you have Bill Payne report in over there a couple of weeks ago. Have you checked him out in the B-58 yet? This colonel laughed. Let me tell you something, Cushman. We got to find if he can fly the T-33.
Oh, goodness.
And I looked at him. I didn't laugh, but I felt like it. I said, by the way, did you come over in that jet fighter over there? He said, yes, I'm qualified as an instructor in it. I said, I'll bet you $10 Bill Payne can fly it better than you can. That,
I bet it did.
right then. He looked at me, he said, you must be kidding, I'm an instructor. Why, he'd never been in it. I said, doesn't make any difference. He'll fly it better than you can. $10.
Here it is.
About a week later, same scene. I'm walking through Armstrong, Blizzard. Blizzard said, Cushman, come over here. He handed me $10.
Did he?
He said, you made me so damn mad when you told me that guy had never been in it could fly it better than I can. I took him up the next day. And you're absolutely right. I've never seen anything like it in my life. This guy his secret is he could fly good instruments. And if you fly good instruments, you can fly any airplane. All you need to know is takeoff speed and approach speed for landing. If you know those two and you fly the gauges. Anyhow, Bill did fly the Lindy Hop. Paris, they have a big air show over there once a year or once every 2 years. And they wanted to have a B-58 in it.
Okay.
And they gave Bill the job, and they wanted to make a little show of it, so they called it the Lindy Hop. That's New York to Paris. And he refueled 3 times going across the Atlantic. And I was in Spain at the time, and I'm in the command post, and we're discussing the refueling, where we would do it and everything. One old boy said, "Well, I wonder how long it'll take him." And this one fellow said, they're doing it in about 6, 7 hours. I guess about 5 hours or so. And this other boy said, "No, I don't think so. You might be able to do it quicker than that, maybe 4 or something." And they said, "What do you think, Cush?" I said, 3 hours and 20 minutes.
3 hours and 20 minutes.
You know how long it took him? 3 hours, 19 minutes, and 40 seconds.
Wow. So how did you know it would be that close?
Well, I flew a lot in the T-Bird and had to mentally compute a lot of that stuff.
Okay.
And it was second nature to me. I just computed he's going to do average 1,000 miles an hour. It's 3,300 miles.
That's some simple math.
Yeah, that's simple. That's 3 hours and 20 minutes.
Wow. 1,000 miles an hour.
Well, of course, when he'd sprint, he's doing 1,400 miles an hour. But he had to slow down 3 times and come down to about, indicated would be about 250 knots. Because that's at altitude, which is the equivalent of about 600 miles an hour.
Well, I'll say 1,400 miles an hour. That's a pretty good sprint.
Yeah, and don't think it doesn't use fuel when they sprint.
I'm sure it's pretty thirsty.
3 times.
Yeah, I'm sure it's pretty thirsty.
But anyhow, that's Payne again. He was a great pilot. Much fun. Well, anyhow, where am I? Oh, yeah, so I moved to Spain. And I'm the operations chief of the Inspector General.
Okay.
And I used to make the people mad because they look to see how much they can write up on people.
Mm-hmm.
And I want, when I leave there, that they can do their job. So I would give them an opportunity when I found something wrong to correct it before I left. Because let me tell you something, next war we have, it's a one-day war if they use atomic weapons.
Yeah.
And everything's going to have to work the first time. So that's the way I felt. Well, anyhow, the director of safety had to go home. He got sick or something. Had to go back to the States. So they took me out. They shut down the Inspector General's job, and I was the director of safety. We had 122 bombers on 6 bases, 3 in Spain and 3 in Morocco. And they all had weapons. And nuclear safety was a big project over there. I had nuclear safety, ground safety, and flight safety. We never had an accident while I was director of safety. We never had a broken arrow. You know what that is?
It's a lost nuke.
No, that's one that could go off. I don't know about lost. I think there was a movie like that one time. But you have to have certain situations for that baby to go off. It just doesn't go off on its own. Something has to trigger it. But anyhow, that worked out. And I was over there for 3 years, and I really enjoyed it. I would go to all the bases down in Morocco and all around Spain. And I had an airplane to do it in, a little one that I liked. I worked for a general. He's the type I'd go to hell and back with him. If he was being the leader, he was good. He called me in one day. Well, his secretary called me and said, the general wants to talk to you. And I said, I was in another building. I said, Roger, I'll be there a few minutes. So I went in. I was the junior member on his staff. All these old colonels, a bunch of them, they were all sitting in his ante office there. And they all ranked me. So I sat down on the end. Just sat there figuring they're going first. And the general secretary said, the general wants to speak to you now. So I walked over and he said, shut the door. I shut the door. He said, sit down. Had a nice leather chair. I went over and sat down. He said, I want to ask you a question. Yes, sir. Who is my worst base commander? I said, if you don't mind, I don't want to answer that.
It's a smart response.
He said, why? I said, hell, General, I might work for that man sometimes. He ranks me. You got anything else to say? I said, no, sir. Answer the question. I said, Colonel so-and-so. He looked startled. He said, you know all those fellows out there in that ante office? I said, yes, sir. You know what they said? Yes, sir, I know exactly what they said. He looked at me and he said, if you're so smart, what did they say? I said, they said he was the best. You're right, that's exactly what they said. Who do you think is the best? I said, the one that all of them said was the worst. He looked at me and he said, now which one is that? I said, Colonel McKee. He said, that's what they said. I said, hell, General, I go to all these bases. They don't get around like I do. I know what's going on. Let me tell you something interesting. The guy I said was best was the lieutenant colonel. They were all colonels. I'm trying to do the timing right, and I'm not sure I can do it. He's lieutenant colonel. 4 years later, if I get it right, or 5, he's a general. And he ended up a major or a lieutenant general.
Wow, okay.
That's how sharp he was. I saved him twice. These older colonels were going to zip him. Hey, Pat. Anyhow, that's the way that happened. And he came out. I called him a long time after I was out of the service. And I assume he was too. But I called him up in Washington. He answered his phone, Colonel McKee. No, Lieutenant Joe McKee. I said, George, how are you? This is Gene Cushman. He said, Gene. He knew I had saved him twice. They tried to crucify him. These old colonels. The general made me go up to his base one day to find out if it was a broken arrow. And he did a great job. And there was this colonel down in our place wanted to crucify him because an airplane engine caught on fire that had an atomic bomb on the airplane. But you know what you have to do if you call a broken arrow?
Mm-mm.
You have to 10 miles around, you got to get everybody out.
10
And
miles.
that would tell everybody in Spain that there were atomic bombs in Spain.
Yeah.
They didn't know about it. Better not, they don't know about it. That would have been a disaster if they'd done that, because it would have taken in the town of Zaragoza. But anyhow, I was in Spain for 3 years. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Working for that general was great. The worst thing he ever did to me is one day I had the chance to go with the flight with the golf team to St. Andrews in Scotland. And I'm walking out to the airplane to get in it to go, and this major runs up to me and he says, "The general wants to see you." I said, "You go back and tell him I was on the airplanes and the engine was running." He said, "Sir, I can't do that." I said, "You can try." "No, sir, I cannot do that." So I missed my chance to play at St. Andrews.
Mm.
I told him later, "You really screwed it up." But anyhow, from there I went to a metropolis called Lincoln, Nebraska. And in Lincoln, Nebraska, I got there a month before the fellow I was replacing was leaving.
Okay.
So for that month, I got all the additional duties that nobody wanted because I didn't have anything else to do. It was the best thing that ever happened to me, because one of the deals was the United Fund, and they had never made better than 50%. And they gave that job to me amongst all the others. And I set up a plan that everybody seemed to be happy. And we made 150% the first year.
Wow.
And the general there, General Lyle, just thought that was fantastic. But the beauty of it is I got to meet everybody worth knowing downtown. And I got
a little politicking.
Yeah, I knew everybody, even the governor. The governor gave me a big plaque, made me an admiral in the Nebraska Navy. You know how much water they got
They
in
had a lot
Nebraska.
of land.
But I got a plaque making me the admiral.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I got to know the editor, the mayor, everybody. I had to put on an air show there for them one time, and of course they came to me and they said, "Can you put on this air show?" I was the DO there, and I said, "Well, I think so." So I got all these airplanes to come in, and we were having a big meeting, and they said, "Now, can we do anything?" And I said, "Now that you asked, the answer to that is yes." They said, "What is it?" I said, "Let me tell you something. These guys, you all don't realize it, but they fly and they have to do all of these things, and General LeMay is expecting 100% all the time. So when they come here, they're sacrificing a weekend with their family. And I think y'all can do something for them." They said, "Well, what would you suggest?" I said, "Give them a hotel or a nice motel, 2 to a room with a bottle of whiskey, and I want you to give them all the restaurants in town, give them free meals, free deals, and the automobile dealers, give them wheels." They did it.
Wow.
They did it.
Nice.
I remember when a couple of the crews left, they came up to me. They said, "Colonel, anytime you want to come back, we'll come back." Well, that went along, and unfortunately, I was divorced there my wife had a little problem, and that she should have handled better than she did. Anyhow, we got divorced. Then I was transferred to Vestavia Hills. I didn't want to go. And the reason I didn't is that the commander at Lincoln was called into a commander's meeting. And the general there was the same general in Spain that I worked for. And they were closing our base. And the general in this meeting with all these commanders asked the commander at Lincoln, "Where's Cushman going?" And he said, "I don't know, I think Charleston, that's another command." And the general says, "I don't believe that." Everybody's writing. I come back, this colonel comes up, said, "You got a situation with General Wade." I said, "What are you talking about?" He practically told them that if they took you out of this organization, whoever did it's in trouble. I said, "You're kidding." He said, "No." I said, "That's the kiss of death. I don't want that." You know, if the general does it, then all the other people are going to look down and do what they can on him.
Yeah.
And basically that happened. The guy there screwed me up so bad, cost me a lot of money, my family got screwed up. I had remarried. And that's an interesting story. My father was not too long for this world, and my daughter was visiting me, and so I took her to Birmingham to see her grandfather for a week. And the second night I was there, that I was home, my aunt, who was my mother's sister, lived here, and she used to call me, and she said, "I'm having this party, and would you bring Elmer Sample Sheriff to my party?" Well, I was free as a breeze. And women were no problem at that stage of the ball game. I said, "Sure, I'll be glad to." So anyhow, it's real interesting to me. It may not be to a lot of other people, but I went over, got to her house, and knocked on the door, and she came to the door. And she said, "Would you come inside for just a minute?" And I said, "Certainly." So I stepped inside, and then she stepped over in the front hall. There was a mirror, and she stood in like women got to fix their hair. What she said to me "Would you come in?" And she walked over, what she was doing over there, and the dress she had on. God, it looked like $1 million. I remember the dress to this day, and that was 55 years ago, or 56. I said to myself, "You're it." It took me 11 months.
11 months?
And we got married. Yeah, I think that was really, I think God leads us around. Different things happen. If something didn't happen, then this wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
And all that sort of thing. I'm a big believer in that. Because there were some things that happened, like going on that, the general saying, "You guys are crazy, Cushman leaves here." Boy, that's the kiss of death. I know it. So that screwed up for me, but in the end result, I met the lady. We were married about 50-some years, and she was a wonderful person. But anyhow, then I came to Birmingham after I retired, and they asked me, there was a General Doster with the Air Guard here, and he asked me to come out and talk to him. And he said, "Have you ever run an airport before?" And I said, well, I ran the one in Lincoln, Nebraska. We had 2 bomb wings and a missile wing there. And I ran the one at Shreveport, Barksdale. He said, you think you could run this airport out here? I said, well, I don't know. I'd have to check into it. He said, well, the fellow that's running it's leaving, going to Texas. So would you check it out? I said, sure, I'll be glad to. So I checked it out. I went back the next week to him and I said, no, I don't want that job. And he said, well, you're perfect for it. I said, I don't want the job. And he said, why not? I said, I have to deal with politicians. And I'm used to somebody tell me something, I take it to the bank. I'd get in serious trouble doing that here. So I don't want to do that. And then I was qualified to fly one of 2 pilots at that time, 1969, that flew company jets. And they wanted me to do that, but I didn't want to do that because the chairman of the board wants to go to New York. I got to get up and take it. I had enough of that in the Air Force. So I said no, and then my wife had a friend named Lola Bromberg. You don't live here, but the Bromberg Jewelry Company. And her father was head of agencies in this insurance company here. And she said, why don't you go, I'll get you an appointment, you can go talk to Dad. I said, okay. So, anyhow, I sized him up pretty well. We talked, he's a nice guy. We ended up great friends. But we got there, he was feeling me out, and I'm sure you talk to people that want to look down on you and get you back on your heels. Mm-hmm. So you're trying to get your deal. Well, he operated that way. Well, I've been chewed out by generals, and so I understand certain things. And we talked for a while, and finally he said, what'd you do in the Air Force? Well, I've told you, I've done everything, all sorts of things. And in a very derogatory way, he's looking down his nose. He said, what makes you think you can sell insurance? Well, let me tell you something about it. I didn't like the way he said that to me. I said, let me tell you something, Charlie. You give me 3 months and I'll do your job better than you're doing it. You got any more questions? You know what his next question was?
When can you start?
You got it. You got it.
Yeah.
Well, I got in the insurance business. I was in the Air Force 27 years, and I spent 31 years in the insurance business. And I made the life member, the $1 Million Round Table, and all that sort of business. I wasn't what I thought was a great salesman, but I sold it and I did it, and it was really a picnic for me because I had no inventory. Nobody worked for me. I worked strictly commission. If Ellen and I wanted to go to the beach, we got in the car and went to the beach.
Yeah.
And I scheduled my deals so that I could work it. And I could take customers out to the country club, play golf, and they liked that.
Yeah.
It was, I really enjoyed it. I wasn't a whirlwind, you know, that said, I changed some things they were doing. Everybody's trying to sell whole life insurance to guys that had just starting to have children, buying a house, buying a car, and all that business. I got them the most inexpensive insurance I could get that would cover the years needed. Forget the rest of it. And it went great. The younger people, it's a lot easier for them. When I reached 80 years of age, I decided to quit. That was 2000. And I figured I had a couple more years. I put in a pacemaker. I've now had 3. Anyhow, we wandered along, and golly, for 20 years I'd wake up, what am I supposed to do now? I didn't like that. It was really hard on me. And then about 4 years ago, Ellen had a problem, and then another problem, and another problem. And she started downhill, and I lost her this year in May.
I'm sorry.
And there's something I'll never forget. I'd been to the dentist that day, and I came back home. I went in, she was in bed, and I talked to her for a while. As I got ready to leave, she looked at me and she said, "Gene, I love you." And I went on in another room. I told her I adored her. I went in another room and did what I had to do, and I came back in, and I could tell that she was really miserable. And she just breathed a little slower and a little slower. She went very quietly, which I'm thankful for. Well, she passed away the 6th of May, and of course, the house is a big house, and I didn't want to live in that house by myself, and I was 100 years old, and I didn't want to take care of the yard, little problems here and there. And my daughter lives very close to this place, Cahaba Ridge, and she knew about it. And I looked at a couple of other places, but this place is delightful.
And the food's good.
The people here are wonderful. Both the help and the people that run it, the helper, and everybody uses first names. So, but what's interesting, they take people from age 55 up. This is a retirement home. And here I am 101 now. And I think I was a marvel when I moved in here. Everybody knew me in 2 days. Hey, there's a guy in here that's 100 years old. Well, they all learned real quick it was me. I don't even wear the name tag. I don't wear the name tag because it's got a magnet. And I don't want a magnet around this little baby. But anyhow, I really enjoyed it. I've met some wonderful people. And I guess that's most of my life story. You wanted to know something about the Berlin airlift. Did I give you enough?
Oh, yes. There were a couple of questions from my viewers that they would like for me to ask, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Okay. One of them wanted to know what your favorite airframe was that you flew. How many in total different aircraft did you fly in your career?
In the Air Force, I flew 42 different.
42 different airplanes.
And 15 civilian aircraft.
Wow.
About 56.
So, out of the 56, which of those was your favorite, and why is that?
Well, I was a fighter pilot at heart.
Okay.
I flew cargo and I flew bombers. I used to scare people in the bombers the way I flew it. The B-52, the crew would say, "Colonel Cushman, quit it!" But anyhow, it's hard to say. I like the little airplanes better. I enjoyed the P-40.
Okay.
And that was the one that Chenault had in China, you know. I like the P-51. It was a little bit different from the P-40. It had a better engine, faster. P-40, you could do things in it you couldn't do in some other airplane. I liked, there was a T-38, was a twin-seated jet that would go through the Mach. And boy, when I flew that thing, I had a ball. Golly. They cleared us on my first flight. We went across the end of the runway doing 300 knots. That's from a standing start and 2 mile roll, you're doing 300. At 500 feet, you're doing 500 knots. And you got to get the nose up or you go through the speed of sound. And they cleared us to 43,000 feet. And I climbed at an angle of about 70 degrees. And when I hit 40,000, I flipped it over on its back and rolled out and rolled back level at 43 and went right through the mud.
Wow.
That I like.
Yeah, I bet. So, is the sonic boom as loud in the cockpit as it is on the ground when maintenance people can hear it?
I never knew that we went through it.
Oh, really? Okay. Wow.
There was one time I put on an air show in Madrid, Spain. We had 500,000 people out there. See, I think that's the number. I thought that was a little much. But they said in the newspaper. And the general was showing off to these Spanish generals. And I'm in the tower running this thing. He said, Cushman, have the so-and-so bomb the field. I said, General, I'm sitting up here in a glass building. I don't like that. He said, well, you figure it out, but I want him to bomb the field. I said, yes, sir. So I called the 104 pilot. I said, you want to have some fun? He said, I really do. I said, bomb the field, but don't you get near the tower. Boy, he comes booming in there. You can see the explosion on the ground.
Wow.
I'll tell you a funny story about that. I was walking through South Central Bell here in Birmingham one day, and as I walked by this one office on the credenza, the fellow had a couple of model airplanes. Well, I talked to everybody. So I wandered in and introduced myself to this fellow. And I said, do you fly or you just keep modeling? He said, I'm an instructor pilot with the Air Guard. I said, with the F4? And he said, yes. I said, I noticed you're flying. You got a model of the 104. And he says, as a matter of fact, I do. I said, did you ever fly? He said, oh, yes. I was with the South Carolina Guard flying the 104. I said, the South Carolina Guard? And he said, yes. I said, were you ever in Spain? He said, as a matter of fact, yes, I was. I said, let me tell you a story. One night at Torrejon, I was in Madrid. I was up one night shooting landings on a T-33. Our runway was 13,000 feet long, and I rolled out and then take off the other way, just shoot landings. I said, one time I was coming in and I could see this 104 sitting ready in number one position to fly. And I heard the tower talking to him, and the pilot said, Tower, you got to get me a clearance. I'll run out of fuel sitting out here. And the pilot said, stand by. And then it kept on. He told him twice to give him a clearance. But anyhow, finally the tower said, here's your clearance. You ready to copy? The TACAN was about a quarter of a mile off the end of the runway. Okay. You are cleared to take off and go to the Airbase Marone in Seville, Spain. And all that. And you could hear them laughing. And you are to clear the TACAN at 15,000 feet. It's a quarter of a mile off the end of the runway. And I said, this pilot said, Roger, I'm ready to go. Well, I had landed and I was down at the far end off the runway. And I could see him at the other end. He pulled out, down the runway he came. The fire was coming out, pumped it up, held it down. I watched him, and then he started climbing. He said, Tower, gave his call sign, clearing the tack at 20,000. He was 20,000 feet, a quarter of a mile off the end of the runway. This fella said, "That was me."
What
I
are
said,
the
"You
chances?"
must be kidding. We were over there flying the same night."
What are the chances?
Yeah.
Wow.
And I was down there at one time at the base in Rome where they were, and the squadron commander, I knew him, and he said, "Would you like," they had 1-2 planes, "would you like to fly an A104? Like I say, I flew everything I could fly. I said, yes, I'd love to fly. And he said, okay. They set us up for 10 o'clock or something, so I got my flying suit, and I'm walking out to get in the airplane. This major comes up, and just like what the general did to me, he said, "Sir, the commander wants to speak to you." I said, "Well, tell him I'll be down. I'm going to fly for about an hour, and I'll be down. I'll be there." He said, "No, sir. He needs to see you right now." And the squadron commander said, "Well, we're flying it this afternoon. You fly this afternoon." I said, "Okay." It crashed on takeoff.
Wow.
Both of them punched out. One of them did okay. One of them landed in the fire.
Wow.
The good Lord was with me.
Yeah. Wow.
I'll never forget that. I had one grandson said, "You mean I wouldn't even be here?" I said, I forgot what I told him, but I think his mama was already here, so it wouldn't affect him. Oh, Lord have mercy. Well, I've had a wonderful life, and
Yeah, it seems like it.
I think the Lord has been good to me. I had wonderful parents. I went through life thinking my father ran everything. He was kind of tough. As I got older, I got to thinking about it. My dad didn't run it. My mama ran the family. Daddy thought he ran the family.
That's the way it normally goes.
She was so smart. She didn't care who got the credit as long as what she wanted to got done.
Yeah.
I'll give her a hand like this. And you go through life thinking your dad's the one running everything. Not that he did. You didn't say yes or no to it. He was a good father. Took us hunting, took us fishing. He was a great athlete. He played football at Georgia Tech as a halfback, and he weighed 136 pounds. Think about that.
Wow. Wow.
He was in high school. He was all city in baseball, football, basketball, 3 years. All 3 of those sports.
Wow. Goodness.
Anyhow, the Lord's been good, hasn't he?
Thank you for watching this episode of the Knock and Talk Show. What an honor it was to listen to Lieutenant Colonel Cushman tell his life story. As I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, the audio was captured solely by my iPad. I realized there was an abrupt ending to the interview. Unfortunately, my iPad reached the end of its video storage space and cut out the last 20 minutes. Hopefully you enjoyed the portions that were recorded. We are making plans to visit the good Colonel again soon, so if you have any questions you'd like for him to answer, please leave them in the comments below. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time. Attention veteran businesses. Do you want an easy way to be certified as a veteran-owned business? Do you want a better way to show it off in the same hard-charging fashion as our old unit badges? You want an easier way to be found, get business write-ups, interviews, social media promotion, and more? avboa.net has your 6. Get access to over 20 hard-charging digital badges for web and social media shares that shows you are a certified veteran-owned business. You've earned it. Show it off. Visit avboa.net. Use code KNOCK6, that's KNOCKSIX. Get your digital badge today.